All right, tonight we're going to be looking at the story of the Good Samaritan and some things that that story can teach us, and then some practical tips that I've picked up over the years that can help us to be a good Samaritan, to be able to help other people who are in need. There we go. So to get us started, I want you to think maybe one or two stories about a time you had a really frustrating experience trying to help someone. Don't mention any names, but sometime maybe you were trying to help and it just didn't seem to go at all like you wanted it to.
I know there have been many such times in my life. The only one that's popping into my head is kind of insignificant. I recall being a teenager babysitting two little kids, and I felt like that the kids should not pour his drink from a heavy pitcher, and it made him really, really steamed. And he told me, but I said, well, I just want to help make sure we can not spill it. Pour anyway. I never got invited back to babysit there, and so I don't know. It's just for some reason it made a big impression on me as a teenager. How much should you let little kids do for themselves? I guess I just didn't have a lot of experience with it.
Yeah,
You probably would have been fine to pour from that pitcher. So I don't know. It's the beginning of learning about that. What help is good and what help is not wanted.
When Will was little, a toddler especially, he would often say, "I do it myself."
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I do it myself. And
I do it.
He was determined that he was going to do it himself. Somebody else, a story when it was frustrating, when you saw somebody who needed some help and you just couldn't quite make it happen.
Well, I remember I was sent to make a visit in the hospital. I worked with one of the chaplains in the pediatrics quite a bit. And I went into this room, and I should never have said what I said, but this precious little child was sitting in the middle of the bed. And when I walked in the door, I said, "Oh, what a adorable little girl with all that beautiful curly hair." And that little boy said, "I am not a girl. I'm a little boy." And he said, his daddy laughed about it, and the little boy said, "Don't visit with me."
Oh.
I was trying to do good, but he was so precious. He looked just like a little girl. And before, I should never have said a little boy or girl. I should have just said, "What a beautiful child."
Yeah.
But you learn.
You learn. You learn.
Oh, yes.
All right. All right. I remember visiting someone in hospital one time, and I had kind of a regular routine of what I would say and what I would do. Mm-hmm. And this man would have none of it.
Yeah.
He didn't want me to be there. He didn't want to have a conversation with me. He didn't want to have me pray for him. None of it. And I remember walking out of the room going, "What did I do to deserve that?"
Yeah. I can imagine.
It was pretty frustrating.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at a very familiar passage, the story of the Good Samaritan. And we're not going to dissect the whole passage. We're going to focus on the Good Samaritan and what the Good Samaritan does. Because as I was thinking about this, sometimes we think of these parables as, it's just spiritual truth, and it's just a kind of an allegory, and it makes us feel good, and has one point, kind of like a sermon. But I think sometimes Jesus was trying to tell us, okay, if you want to do these things, this is how you can do it. So let's listen to this story that's very familiar. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there? He answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you've given the right answer. Do this and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. So what jumps out at you about the Good Samaritan?
His behavior was an opposite response to, am I my brother's keeper?
He went right into it, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, yes, at least he had mercy on the man and wanted to help him the best he could, which was the thing to do. I'm a little disappointed that the other 2 just walked by on the other side and wouldn't even help the poor man.
Yeah.
But yeah.
He treated him like a loved one.
Yeah. He treated him, I think, like he would want somebody to treat him.
Yeah.
If he had a problem and got into trouble like that. Was
Good. All right. Move my pointer in the right spot. Hang on. There we go. All right, it's stuck. Hang on. There we go. Some things that I saw. First off, he saw the man by the wayside. He paid attention to him. It says he went over to him. But I think when it says that he saw him, it wasn't just, okay, he noticed him out of the corner of the eye. He paid attention. And I think that's one of the things that is the first step in helping someone, is paying attention to the people around you. We get so busy and so in a blur that everything around us is out of focus. And so we don't see the people around us who are hurting. And so the first thing we have to remember is that, he saw him. He noticed that he was there. And if he hadn't have done that, then nothing else would have followed. And then it says he was moved. Some translations will say moved with pity. Some will say moved with compassion. I like the word compassion better than pity.
Yeah.
Pity is kind of looking down on the other person, saying, oh, how terrible that you're in that situation. And compassion, the root of that word is to suffer with. And so it is to feel with that person. Your heart hurts because they're hurting. And so he was moved with compassion. And he had realized that. And then he stopped. We don't think about that very often, but he could have seen him and noticed that he was hurting, and he could have been very moved with compassion and said a little prayer and moved on. There's a passage in James where James says, if you say, go, my brother, and be fed, that's not the same as feeding someone.
Right.
So he stopped. And so one of the things that we have to do when we're discovering someone who's hurting is we have to stop what we're doing long enough to respond.
Right.
And that is so hard in our high-speed world and with all the responsibilities we have, to just stop and say, okay, here's somebody who's hurting. What can I do? The next thing is he bandaged his wounds. You know, he took care of what was happening right then.
Mm-hmm.
What he could do with what he had. He had some oil and he had some wine with him. And so he did an immediate response and did what he could right there in that moment, and stopped the bleeding, I guess, is one way to think about it.
Yeah.
He took care of what was happening right there with what he had. And then I hadn't really thought about it too much before this time, but then he took him to a safe place. You know, he didn't leave him there and say, okay, I've bandaged your wounds. You're probably going to make it now. Go in peace. He knew that it was not safe on the side of the road. And so he took him to a safe place and got him where he could be rested and cared for and would not have to worry about being robbed again on the side of the road. And then he provided for the ongoing care of this man. There were things that he could not do. He couldn't stay there forever to care for this man. He was on a trip, you know, he had a life to live and he had other things to do. He had to be somewhere at a certain time, but he made sure that this person who he'd found hurting was taken care of, that he was in good hands. And he made sure they had the resources. You know, in this case, he left some money and said, if you need more, I'll come back through. I'll double check. I'll follow up. So he made provision for some ongoing care, what he couldn't do himself. Because many times when we find somebody hurting and we're dealing with it, we reach a point where we realize we can't stay. You know, we can't be there every day, every hour of every day. So what are we going to do then? And so he models that he does take care of some ongoing care. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. Go do like the Good Samaritan did if you want to love your neighbor. So we're going to look at tonight how we can do likewise. How can we follow this model in our everyday lives, and some helps that might be helpful in doing that, some do's and don'ts, and maybe some things that we can tuck in our belt and save for another day. So I always say start with the needs. Start with what this person in front of you actually needs. Sometimes we go to a person who we discover is hurting and we try to meet a need they don't have. You know, that's when you go to the person who's hungry and you hand them a tract, or you go to the person who's hungry and you invite them to come to a meeting. We start with what is it that this person needs, and if we start with what they need, then we can move on to some other things. And it's helpful if when we realize that the thing that you first see may not be all that they need, and it may not even be the most important thing that they need. So let's look at some of those basic needs. The first is social. People need to feel connected. When they're in a difficult situation, one of the things that we often feel is alone. We feel like we're the only person with that problem. We're the only person who's ever had that problem. No one understands us. No one cares for us. And so when someone just stops to be with us and connect with us, that is a huge step, just for someone to be there. When I was doing hospital chaplaincy, we used to talk about the ministry of presence, Presence, just being there. You know, we couldn't solve the medical problems. We couldn't solve all the problems they had at home, but we could be there with them through that dark time. And one guy said one time, he said, I guess all you do is hand out Kleenex and Coca-Cola. But that was a part of it. You know, we were there for folks. So pay attention to how people need to feel connected with someone else. Emotional. People need permission to feel. Now, for some folks, that's not so difficult. But for many people, when they're in a crisis, they don't know how to feel, or they're trying to bottle it up, and they want to try to hold themselves together to be strong for everybody. And with you not being a person who's in the middle of the crisis and a person who's not being affected by the crisis, you can be a safe person that they can let go a little bit of, and actually feel what they're feeling and share what they're feeling and just cry, or just rail and be angry. Sometimes they just need a safe person to say that they're angry about what's going on. And since you're not in the middle of the crisis, you're not a part of the family, you're a safe person to be angry at. And so that can be just a huge help to people when we give them permission to feel and express their feelings. And we don't want to ignore the physical needs. You know, if blood is spouting from their arm, take care of that first. You know, there may be an immediate physical need that needs attention right now. It may be a wound. It may be hunger. You know, if somebody hasn't eaten for a week or a day or so, they're not able to deal with anything else because they're hungry. And so maybe saying, hey, let's go get a sandwich. Let's go get a bowl of soup. Let's go get something to eat. May be the immediate need. It may be sleep. They may need a place where they can go sleep because they're exhausted. So it may be, you know, getting them home where they can go to sleep, or getting them to a house where they can go to sleep. Whatever the physical needs are, sometimes that is so overwhelming that they can't deal with any of the other needs until that's met. So pay attention to their immediate needs in that moment. And then the mental needs. This is one that you may not think about so much, but you've probably experienced it if you've ever been in a crisis. Your brain stops working. And you know there's things you've got to do, and there's things you need to make some decisions, and you just aren't sure where to start. And it's like you're trying to think through molasses. And so just having someone there who can help talk through some of those decisions, not making those decisions for them, not telling them what the answers are, but helping them walk through that. All right, what could I do? What can I do? What are my options? And helping them get unstuck from that being frozen in making mental decisions. And then spiritual, people need to experience God's presence and God's grace. And as Christians, that's one of the most important needs that we can help meet. Just to be there as a representative of God, that God is there for them, that God loves them, that God's not going to judge them, because, you know, sometimes a crisis is a result of a bad decision. And so people are feeling judged because they feel like they've done something that they deserve whatever's happened. And they may have, or they may not have. But at that point, they need grace. They need someone to say, God loves you no matter what right now. And I'm here for you no matter what, and I'll be here for you, just as God is. And so when we express that presence and that grace to someone, it opens up the door to their connection with God. Because so many times if they're not experiencing grace, they're shutting that door, and they don't want to have anything to do with God. They may be blaming God, they may be blaming themselves. So to have someone there who can help them experience that side of God is very important. Thoughts about needs that you have? Questions? Does that make sense?
It does. I was thinking about just the concept of being interrupted and how in this story there was an interruption. You know, you were using the word he stopped, and how some of the really important things that we are called to do pop up into our lives as interruptions. How I want to be a person who is flexible about my own goals, my own schedule, my own day, so that at any time, if I'm supposed to stop, that I'll be graceful and not regard that as an intrusion into my otherwise productive day.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're going to go into that in just a minute, because that's a very important thing.
Yeah.
Laura, you are preaching to me. I struggle with that because I'm so task oriented.
It is so hard, particularly the way our world works.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's look at planning to care. This is before you ever see the need. Okay. Some things that you may want to think about being ready. So the first is be prayerful. And this is so important, as even before we encounter someone who's hurting, but especially as we first come across someone who's really in a difficult position, is just pray first and ask that the Lord would help you, to see what's going on, to hear, to listen to this person, and for guidance on what to do. Because so many times we really have no idea what to do when we're first encountering a crisis situation. And we just pray, God, help me to do that like you would. Not like how I would, but how you would. And that can be helpful. You can phrase that prayer however you want to. I know sometimes I just say, Lord, guide me over and over and over. Give me the words. Help me to hear this person. But be prayerful, knowing that we're not doing this by ourselves. God never intended us to minister to other people just by ourselves. He is there with us. And approaching this from an attitude of prayer reminds us of that, and gives us the strength that we need to be helpful. The second one is be prepared. Now, this sounds kind of funny, but especially for physical needs like food, we've had in the past PBJ bags, people being Jesus, and it's just a bag of snack items, so that when you encounter someone who's asking for money or asking for some help, you have something ready to give them. Some people also have keep gift cards for McDonald's or Walmart or something like that, as something to give something physically to somebody when they're stuck and needing some immediate assistance. Having phone numbers. We'll talk about some phone numbers later in your phone, where some places you can call. ABCCM's phone number, the 211 phone number, the church phone number, those kinds of things. Having those where you can get to them instead of going, oh gosh, I wish I had the number to call someone. Having those phone numbers with us is very helpful. If you want some church business cards that are just blank, we have some of those with a church's phone number and address that you can hand to folks. One thing I do ask, and it's something that we're trying to encourage folks, is when you find someone who needs help, your first response isn't, here, call the church and they'll take care of you. You are probably there for a reason in that moment. And so, like the Good Samaritan, we should look and see, what is it that I can do in this moment, rather than passing this person on to someone else who I feel is more qualified. We'll talk about later that, there are times to refer them to someone else, but be thinking about what can you do in that moment yourself before you pass them on to someone else. Be proactive. Sometimes we say, if there's anything we can do, just call us, which is a nice thing to say, but people usually don't call you. So a better thing to say would be, can I bring you some food? Can I take you somewhere? Can I pray with you? Would you like to talk about this? You know, actually state what you're willing to do for them, and not just leave it up to them to come back to you if they ever need some help, because most people won't. So have a way to offer what you can do to help. And then going right along with that is be definite. Have some boundaries. Be clear about what you can do and what you can't do. You know, if you're a woman by yourself and you encounter a man on the road who's you don't know, never met, don't know anything about, offering him a ride somewhere is probably a can't do. So, you know, if they were to ask you to give them a ride, no, I can't, but I can, you know, call someone who might be able to give you a ride, or I can go get you something and bring it back to you, those kinds of things. It's also helpful. We have a person that we often comes by looking for a ride, and he says, can you give me a ride to such and such? And we always say, if we're able to, sure. And it never fails. Once you get him in the car, he says, and can you take me to Bojangles?
He's hungry.
And so we have learned that if our time is limited, and we will say, yes, I can take you there, but I can't take you to Bojangles today. Or if it's a quiet day and there's not much going on, we can say, yeah, I tell you what, I'll take you there and we'll stop by Bojangles. But we've set some parameters there of what we're able to do and what we're not able to do.
Right.
Another thing that we've learned over the years is when somebody comes in and they want something like that, we'll say, I can give you 20 minutes. I've got 20 minutes. And what can we do in 20 minutes? Or can we come back another time when I can give you more time? And so that's a way to be definite and set some definition and some boundaries about what you really can't do. You know, even the Good Samaritan knew he couldn't stay there forever taking care of that man. He had to be able to get him to a place where he was okay, and he had to move on. He had to be somewhere else. And so that's a real thing. So letting people know up front what you can do and what you can't do is very helpful to both. The flip side of that is going back to what Laura said. We still have to be interruptible. We have to be available and flexible, because sometimes there are some things that come before us that are more important than whatever we planned on doing.
Right.
And so we have to measure that and know that, you know, yes, I really was planning on going to Chick-fil-A today, or Target or wherever, but this right now is much more important. And so I'm going to have to let go of what my plan was and go with this immediate need. And that goes back to that being prayerful, that sense of this is something that I need to be here now for, and I'm the person that God's put in this spot to help at this moment. And then the last B thing, years ago, I was meeting with an evangelist, and he taught me that a person will evangelize the same way they make friends, which was one of the most helpful things I've ever heard, because I was feeling terrible that I was a terrible evangelist, that I wouldn't go up and talk to strangers and tell them about Jesus. And he said, do you ever go up and talk to strangers? And I went, well, no. And he said, well, you're probably not going to evangelize that way either. You're going to evangelize the same way that you make friends. That if it's a long-term relationship and you have people that you cultivate relationships quietly one-on-one, that's the way you're going to share Jesus too. I think that applies here too, that we're going to minister and help other people as ourselves in the way that we make friends and the same way that you get things done in the rest of your life. You know, there are some people that when they see something that needs to be done, they do it. You know, they do it themselves and they get it out of the way and it's done. There are other folks that when they see a need, they step back and they assess the situation and they try to figure out, all right, what needs to happen here? Who can I pull in to help me with this? What resources do I have to do this? And they kind of think it through and they get it done. So I think thinking about the way we help other people is going to be the same way we get other things done is a helpful thing to think about. There may be times when God stretches us out of our comfort zone and we're in a place where we can't do it like we normally do. But probably typically, we're going to be trying to help other people the same way we do other things, the same way we get other things done. Questions or thoughts about planning to care? Hold on, you're muted, Laura.
I do forget that every time. So what does our church do for people who wander up and ask for logistical help?
We have a couple of things. Our first question is always, have you been to ABCCM?
Mm-hmm.
Because ABCCM can help them with a wide array of issues, whereas we can only help maybe with an immediate need. So we always ask, have you been to ABCCM? Sit down and talk with them. They may be able to help you with a whole bunch of things. If they have, and ABCCM has said that they can't help them with that immediate need, or if we call ABCCM and they say, hey, they've been here, there's nothing we can do right now. We've already helped them during this time period. There's a particular need we can't help with. Then we look to see what we can do. On the weekends, particularly when we're on call, we may go get a set of groceries, a very small set of groceries to get them through the weekend until they can get to ABCCM on Monday. We will go get a tank of gas for someone who's trying to get to work, particularly. Because if you can't get to work, then you can't make money and you're not going to be able to pay gas. So we'll occasionally get a meal for someone. We are doing less and less of putting people up overnight in a hotel. One, because it is so very expensive in our area that you could do a lot of other things for the same amount of money. But there are times, particularly when it's a family with children, that will put them up overnight. Kristen, am I leaving anything else out?
It sounds like you covered everything. Did you mention that there have been times when we've helped people get to doctor appointments, counseling appointments?
Yeah.
We've kind of taken turns doing that sometimes.
Yeah, when we have particularly folks that we know who need transportation to something very important, we'll call some church members.
Yeah. Well, in being a
get them to the
deacon,
appointments.
I over the years, I have known of a number of times that I've been called to take people groceries, to take people to get their medicine, and to take people to the doctor. And I've shuffled things around so I could do that because I never told them no. I made arrangements to do that. And I remember one time in particular, Joe called me and said to take groceries to this family, and it was a cold, frosty morning, and I got up real early and went to the grocery store, and this man that knew me, he said, what are you doing with all these groceries this early in the morning? I said, well, I have a family need. And but yeah, we were called. I mean, I know other deacons were too, but we've been called on to help people where there was a need.
Did I answer your question, Laura?
Yes, I didn't want to take too much time with it because the rest of you probably already understand that answer, but I was curious.
That's a good question. Good question.
Yeah.
We do not give out money. We do not give out blanket gift cards. that would
Mm.
cover a lot of things.
No.
And we've gotten more and more careful about the hotels things because some people have learned to manage that as a lifestyle.
Yeah.
So we've watched that. Okay. All right, let's look at some don'ts. Don't promise what you cannot deliver.
No.
And the example I put here is everything's going to be all right. Sometimes it's not. But there are also things, sometimes we'll promise, we'll get you into a good place, or we'll get you here, or we can get you that. Sometimes there are some reasons that we don't know about that something can't happen. But we can say in the theological sense, God will get you through this, or I will work to see what I can find out, or I will work to see if we can find you some help. We will try to get you in touch with some people who can help you. But promising that the problem will be solved is probably too much to promise. And promising that everything's going to be okay is too much to promise. Promising that God loves them is good. Promising that God will be with them no matter what is good. Those kinds of things are good. But sometimes we promise outcomes that we really don't know the answer to. And then on the other side, don't tear down someone else's foundation. When you meet someone who's in hurt, they may have a certain idea of how the world works. And it usually has to do with God's will, or God caused this to happen, or God will, you run into all kinds of things. I guess the one that disturbs me the most is when in the death of a child, someone will say, God needed that child more than we did, which just causes me to turn over upside down. But that may be all that's holding them together in that moment. So it's not the time for a deep theological discussion about why that's not true. Sometimes I will say, I like to think, in that particular case, I'll say, I like to think that God welcomes a child who has died. And without, dismissing their viewpoint, but at least introducing a different one. But sometimes when people are saying, well, this must have been God's will, and you differ on that, be careful about going against that, because that belief may be what's holding them together in that moment. And that's a hard one, but I've seen it over and over again. Another one, don't deliver professional opinions. That sounds like appendicitis, or they'll never sue you, or they can't do that to you. Better would be, that would be a good question to ask your doctor. That would be a good question to ask a lawyer, unless you happen to be a doctor or a lawyer. Sometimes we deliver our opinions as if we are experts, and a person in a crisis doesn't really know that you're not an expert. And that can go to our personal experience too. We can say, my Aunt Lucy had that and she died. It's not very helpful. And sometimes not being helpful too is, my Aunt Lucy had that and she was fine.
One of them.
That's pretty bad too. Be careful about delivering professional opinions and delivering anecdotes from your life that may or may not be applicable to their situation. Do not share what you've heard without permission. Caring for someone is not an outlet for gossip. Sometimes we hear something that's so amazing that we feel like, I've got to tell somebody. You maybe call one of the pastors if you feel like you have to tell somebody. But better to ask when you're working with someone, particularly someone who's related to the church, is, what would you like the church to know? You know, you may have sat in a room and heard the doctor tell everything that just happened to this person. Well, that's not what needs to go on the prayer list.
No.
So we ask, what would you like the church to know? And it may be mama's in the hospital, and that's all they want everybody to know. It is amazing how private some people are. And
Oh,
we
yeah.
have to honor, I see Laura shaking her head. We have to honor that, because if you break that, then they're not going to let you know anything else. And so we don't share what we've heard without permission. Always ask,
No.
what do you want us to pass on to other people? Any questions about those don'ts or thoughts about those?
If you share stuff that you're not supposed to be sharing and they find it out, they will never trust you again. They won't trust you anymore to share things with you.
Yeah.
You said this, but I have experienced this, and I do really believe it. People who are in a deeply emotional state can't learn in that moment.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
It's just not a teachable time for those people. And so, yeah, it's just important, because it's not compassionate to try to teach them and to treat them as people who need to learn in that moment.
That is a great way to put it. I'm going to add that to my list. I like that. Because sometimes that's what we're doing. We're trying to help them and tell them what they need to do. And it's not going in or out or anywhere.
But they can't hear you.
Yeah. Mentally, emotionally, every way.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm writing it down. I like that, because that's a good way to put it. All right.
One other thing
okay, go ahead.
I wanted to offer is, it seems thoughtful to me that if you are going to help somebody, that you do it in such a way that they don't have to do work later. For instance, if you're going to bring them a meal, can you put it in something disposable so that they don't have to keep up with your dish and then get it back to you? That to try to let your help be, I don't know how to finish what I'm trying to say, but to not make people have to also work with your plan to help them.
Yeah, that's great. I see Kristen nodding her head on that.
Two of my dearest friends, and I know the reason they did this is because they'd been working all day and they were exhausted. I was home with a newborn. I'd been home for about 4 days, crying all the time. David was at work. They wanted to bring me dinner. They brought me a frozen lasagna that was still frozen. And it takes forever when you have to bake them frozen. They have to bake for like 2 or 3 hours. And I just sat there and cried while that was on your face.
Oh.
They were trying to
Yeah.
help, but
I was going to say that. Don't bring them something they have to cook.
Yeah. Those are good. That's a good example.
Yeah, and put it in a container that it can be disposed of and fix it. Yes, because we've learned that over the years. It's so much better. Yeah. Please don't take them something they have to cook. That is just, thought was good, but
not as helpful.
They realized what that was going to create for me, or, but some people do like freezer meals, like in addition to the meal, they like something to put in the freezer for weeks later if they're in that situation. But I wasn't in that situation.
Some lasagna right then.
And I would have rather them sat with me and brought me like a cheeseburger from McDonald's and just spent time with me.
Yeah.
A lot of money and work into the salad and the lasagna and all that. But then they had to leave. But I almost was like, I would rather just have somebody keep me company and just bring me something cheap, But it was a sweet, sweet gesture, and I was very grateful. But I just remember crying over that lasagna.
That's a great example.
Yeah, it is.
All right, let's look at some do's. Do listen. Listen. If you don't do anything else, listen. Sometimes not all. The most important thing people need is to have someone listen to them. particularly if they're in the midst of family and they can't share what they are thinking and what they're feeling with family, to have someone who's got a little bit of distance from the situation to just sit and listen is huge. And so if you feel like you can't do anything else, always be available to sit and listen to somebody tell their story and how they're feeling and what they're thinking. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then I mentioned connect with resources. You know, if someone is in a critical physical issue, call 911. If they're suicidal and you can't leave them, you know, call 911. Call a suicide hotline. Those are important times where you have to get professional help there right away. If you have other needs, 211 is a tremendous resource here in Buncombe County, in most of North Carolina, I think, where you can call that number and they can put you in touch with any of the agencies in Buncombe County. And no matter they'll ask you, and they know how to ask the questions about what kind of need you have. They have a good list there, and they can refer you. They also have a website now. I think it's called 211 as well. If you're trying to find an agency that can help a very specific need, that's a great way to find that. Another good number I've learned over recent years is the non-emergency number for the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department. I put it on there, 250-6670. You know, sometimes you want somebody to be checked on, or there's something going on and you're concerned about it, but you know this is not 911. This is not an emergency. You can call that number and describe the situation. And they will let you know if this qualifies as a 911, or if it's something that they can let their patrolling officers know about, or if they can get somebody else to do a welfare check on someone that you're worried about. That's the number to call. And then y'all probably know our minister on call number. You can reach one of us 24/7. One of us has always got that number going straight to our cell phone. And so you can reach one of us that way at any time. Questions about those resources?
Would you be willing to put that on the Facebook page?
Yeah.
Or I don't know. I'm afraid if I try and screenshot it, I'll turn this meeting off.
Okay, I'll tell you what. I've also got this. Let me see. Have you ever gotten a document off the chat? Oh, did y'all just freeze up?
I don't know how to do that.
Okay.
Anyway, it's my job to find those numbers later. I can do it later. It's all right.
Well, I have got a PDF of this presentation, and I'm going to share it in the chat. And then I think if you hit your chat button, at least in theory, you should be able to pull that document down. Is it there?
I don't
Yes.
see it yet. But, oh, do you have it?
Okay, it may take a second. But if you'll hit the chat button, there should be a document there that you can download.
Okay. Sorry to take time for that.
Oh, no, I meant to mention that at the beginning, and that reminded me, so that's good. All right, and this kind of goes along with listening, but there are some really good questions that you can kind of have in your quiver of arrows of ways to help. Would you like to talk about it? You know, sometimes the answer is no. And we need to honor that. Sometimes we go in, oh, we're gonna talk this through, and they're not there yet. So the first question is, would you like to talk about it? And then you've probably heard this from therapists or something like similar. I heard you say this, that your daughter is gone. You know, did I hear that right? One, that helps them hear what they said to see if they've jumbled the facts in the telling of it. And two, it helps them hear it so they know, you know, what they said. And it kind of helps them process to hear you say it back to them. And also helps you from mentally trying to process something that is a misconception. I've heard things wrong in conversations and gone way down a road and then realized, oh,
That wasn't it at all.
that wasn't it at all. So when you're listening, you know, every once in a while say, now what I heard you say was this. Did I get that right? It's very helpful. Then asking a person, what do you want to do now? And you can also emphasize, what do you want to do now? To give them pause to kind of say, okay, what I really want to do now is go to the bathroom. What I really want to do now is get a cup of coffee or go home, or, you know, to kind of get that input. And then sometimes when they're in that trying to figure out what to do, what can you do now? What are some of your options? You know, can you call your employer? Can you call your family? Can you, is there a friend that you can go home and stay with? What can you do? What are your options is really what you're trying to help them figure out, so that they can figure, all right, what are my options? What could I do here, instead of feeling like there's nothing I can do. And then you'll find that sometimes they are blank. It's kind of that they can't learn. Their brain is not working. And so one way that you can prime that pump is, well, what would happen if you called your boss? Or what would happen if we found you a place to stay tonight? What would happen if, you know, and throw out some scenarios that you're not saying, let's do this, or I'm going to do this, but help them kind of grasp, okay, if we could do that, then that might take the whole load off. You know, if I could get some groceries for tonight, I could make it through the weekend. So that what would happen if is a helpful way to move ahead. What do you need to find out to move ahead? Sometimes they're just at a loss for what to do. So, you know, what do you need to find out? Do you need to find out where she could stay? Do you need to find out where I can get some food? Do I need to find out where my child is right now? You know, did somebody pick them up after school? What do you need to find out to move ahead? Is a really good question. Can I pray with you about this? I've always been shocked when people say no, because people will. There's some people that's not a part of how they deal with crisis, or they're just so mad with God they don't want to deal with God right now.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the times people will say, yeah. And then the most interesting question to me is, what would you like me to pray for? And sometimes people come up with answers that it would have never occurred to me in a million years to include that in my prayer. You know, pray for my mama back home so that she's not worrying about me. Pray for me to find the answer to this. Pray for, and so that's a really good question to ask when you're asking someone, you know, can I pray with you? What would you like me to pray for? And it's funny, a lot of times they'll say, I don't know, or whatever. But sometimes you get some really, really important answers by asking folks what they would like you to pray for. All right. Do y'all have any questions? Boy, I'm shocked. There is something called mental health first aid or psychological first aid. It is a course that you can take. It's a full day course usually, or 2 half days. If you're really interested in trying to help people who are struggling with an emotional crisis, that is a good tool for folks to look at. And we can also connect you with some other resources if you're interested. Anything else before we go?